When my friend and colleague, Dr. Keith Gardner, asked me to develop a presentation on agility, I started thinking about what it takes to have an agile organization. Why do we need the one, and what are the characteristics that an organization that's agile needs? And I thought that focusing on the workforce or the people in the organization might be something that would be interesting to explore. So, what do we mean by organizational agility? Here are a couple of definitions. The capability of a company to rapidly change or adapt in response to changes in the marketplace. Or the ability to identify and capture opportunities more quickly than rivals do. Both of these seem like a good reason to have an agile organization. So let's take a look at some of the characteristics of an agile organization. What does it take to be agile? In a book, Fast Strategy, How Strategic Agility Will Help You Stay Ahead of the Game, by Yves Dose and Mikko Kosonen, they talked about three characteristics. The first was strategic awareness, having a keen view of the marketplace and the changing conditions that contribute to the industry and its characteristics. And so being aware of those, and then once you have the awareness, being able to adapt the strategies and set goals that allow the company to take advantage of the competitive environment. After that, you need leadership that can be aligned around the new goals. And that means that everybody in the organization, all the leaders, can say, yes, that's where we want to go, and we're committed to getting there. The third thing is resource flexibility, because if the organization doesn't have the capability of moving the resources from one place to another, or to finance a new direction, or move the people, then it can't respond. And so I've added a fourth one, and that is an agile workforce, and that is people that can adapt to the new change and change their methods and assignments and capabilities in response to the needed change. Now, one can say, okay, workforce is part of the resources, and of course it is, but I'd like to focus on the human element here. The chart that's shown on this slide is one from that book, Fast Strategy. And the vertical axis, the y-axis, indicates the speed of change in the environment. And then the horizontal axis plots whether the changes are simple and linear or complex and systematic. And so companies that are entrepreneurial companies just starting are generally focused on one product, one service, and one general marketplace. And so it's relatively simple in that sense, but they do need to have, they are operating in an area where this need for change is quite rapid. But on the horizontal scale, companies that are driven by strategic planning, or companies that have been in business in a stable industry for a long time, can plan their strategy and pretty much expect to meet it, provided they do what's required. But if you move up the arrow and look at an environment where a company is experiencing rapid change, and the nature of the change is complex, then you need companies who are, in the words of these authors, strategically agile. So let's flip it for a minute and look at what can limit an organization's agility. And we won't talk about all these, but I thought it was worthwhile to think about this, that bad information systems, an organization that's a company that's just basically too big, excessive controls, external and internal regulations, or an inefficient organizational structure. And I've listed job descriptions because job descriptions are a way that lock people into a role that's relatively static. And you need flexibility in an organization for the people to move around. Let's take a look at an organization from a diagrammatic standpoint. And if you think about this first as the diagram of an entrepreneurial company, let me go backwards. The top layer is what some organizational theorists call the ad hoc layer, which is the people are moving around as necessary to get the job done. I've labeled this operations layer. And then, of course, an organization needs processes in order to get the work done. So if it's an entrepreneurial organization, that top layer is probably the largest thing. A company that's starting out doesn't have a lot of processes, and those are developed over time. But if you look at a largely stable organization, let's say a big insurance company, they are all about processes, and very little of the organization is in the flexible, creative area. So let's consider an agile team. And what does an agile team look like? Well, a good example, of course, is the military, because we have well-defined units there. And so basically, if you look at the structure of a team, everyone has a set of core skills and training. That's an assumption. If you're part of the U.S. Army, for instance, everybody's gone through the same basic training, so you can say that they have the same essential skill set. Then we need to train the team to operate as a team so that they know how to communicate, they know how to work together, and they can take advantages of each other's skills and capabilities. And then if you have a particular objective, then you need to have specialized skills that build on top of those other two. So perhaps you have someone who is a skilled sniper, or someone who is skilled in munitions or whatever. And the same can be true in business. So we build upon core skills and training. We develop teams, and we bring together people with specialized skills in order to meet our objectives. And so some of the characteristics of an agile team then would be a clear, unambiguous objective, which is to say that the team knows what it needs to accomplish. There is total alignment of the team around that goal. Everybody understands the goal, is committed to it. The team members are capable of independent action as necessary, and they would work hard to meet the objective. And of course, they have a high degree of trust. And now let's focus at the individual level, the Agile Individual. And how can we think about the Agile Individual? Well, this chart's all about exercise, but what are the characteristics that we'd like to see in an agile person? Well, first place, that they are capable of changing from one direction to another one. But we have some way of measuring that. And in our work, we use personal assessments to try to develop executive teams and working teams and such. And the assessments we use have basically three parts. The first is a DISC test, and some of you listening to this recording probably have taken one. And in our case, the DISC is decisiveness, interaction, stability, and caution. The second test is a values test that looks at 7 different values and tries to measure how a person is motivated. And it used to be when we trained managers, we said, your job is to motivate your people. Well, generally today, we say your job is to discover how people are motivated, because all of us are not motivated in the same way. The third test is called Attribute Index. We won't talk about that today, but it's basically a measurement of thinking capability, of empathy, and of things like your self-esteem. So we're going to focus on the first two and then talk about how we can use these to get an indication as to whether somebody might be an Agile team member. So let's think first about the DISC assessment. As I said, the four characteristics we measure are decisiveness, interactivity, stabilizing, and cautious. And think of this as the speed of which somebody likes to decide, for instance. And when we look at this test, here are some of the words that describe different levels of on the D, I, S, and C scale. So someone who's high in D could be demanding. Somebody in the lowest would be unobtrusive, but you see different words that describe the scale. But when we measure these people with this instrument, then we actually get numbers that describe where they fit on the scale. And if you've taken these, you probably understand that. So let's then take a look at an output for two different people on this DISC test. So here we have person A and person B. So person A is on the left side and person B is on the right side. And person A has a D score, a decisiveness score of 99. This is a person who's very fast in making decisions. Probably impatient, just can't wait for others to make the decision, and the low caution score, the low C, would say this is probably a person that doesn't like details. So he or she is high in interactive and relatively high in stability, but the stability and caution are low with respect to the other two. So the person's predominant style is going to be to interact with people, but be relatively quick in making decisions. On the other hand, the person on the right is got a D score of 25, relatively high on interaction, but quite high on stability and higher than the left person, the person A, on caution. And so if you want to compare these two, which one could you expect to be less prone to change? And that would be the one on the right, because of that person that wants to optimize his or her stability, is relatively cautious about making decisions compared to the one on the left. And so therefore this person would be unlikely to have high sense of agility in changes. So if you had a group of people who had the scores like this individual on the right, this would be a team that's not very prone to change. Now we can plot these scores in a team situation so that we can look at how the team is distributed across these four factors. And so here's a diagram of that. So here you have D, I, S, and C around the four corners. And so person who's high in D, like that 99 percentile person, would fit up way up on the D scale, up there around the 10 you see in the left. But here is a group that all except two of the people are really grouped in the high C and high S categories. And this would be, you've got one deviant in the middle, then that would indicate a relatively flat score across all four, and one person who's way up there, very high on I and D. But this is a group that, as a group, would be highly unlikely to change. They would be resisting change, and furthermore, since they're all pretty much alike, they'd probably all be agreeing with each other. So if you wanted an agile organization, you would certainly not choose this group. Now, I don't have an example right with me, but what would we like to see for an Agile group? And the answer is, when we look at this chart, we like to see people scattered all over the chart. So we have a variety of different skills, different profiles. But we can get an indication of how a group's propensity to change based on the independent measurements. In the values assessment, we look at 7 different values: aesthetic, economic, individualistic, political, altruistic, regulatory, and theoretical. And so we measure the numerical score, and when we look at the results of this, generally we look to see what are the 2 or 3 highest values, and that would give us some indication as to how a person is motivated. And so aesthetic is usually a high measurement for artists. Economic is how important money and practical returns are. Individualistic is a measure of a person's desire for independence and uniqueness. Political is typical of managers and people who want to lead. Altruism is helping people. Regulatory is sticking to rules and structure and order. And theoretical is knowledge and understanding. Now, considering this list, what kind of person would you think would be less prone to change? What would be the indicator? And that would be regulatory. So someone who's high in regulatory wants to stick to the rules. If you were looking for people who like to change, then you would probably be looking for people who were high on the political scale, who want to influence others and try to lead them. So in this sense, this measurement, we're mainly looking for the negative characteristic if we're trying to measure a group. And that is, those people high in regulatory would be people that we'd have to work with perhaps longer to get them to accept change. So let's take a look at, again, 2 different people from the first ones. And so here's the one up on the upper left is highest in individualistic and political and theoretical. So theoretical means a fast learner. Political is power in a group, and individualistic is a strong individual personality. And those gray lines mean that the center line is the mean of everyone who of all those who've taken the test, hundreds of thousands. And you're looking at 1 standard deviation on each side. So the person up on the upper left on the individualistic score is over 2 standard deviations higher than the norm for that measurement. So the person on the right, much different profile. They are high on regulatory, and they are more than 2 standard deviations higher than the norm on regulatory. They're a little high on theoretical, but their economic is very, very high. And so if you looked at this profile and this person, you might say that if you wanted to get them to change, one of the ways that you could persuade them to change was to say, if we go in this direction, then your economic return, your salary, your bonuses, or whatever, might be higher, and that economic might overcome their regulatory. And so now, let's take a look at that same group that we looked at before on the DISC scale and see what their values look like. Well, they are all grouped pretty much around the economic indicator. And so they are all strong on the economic indicator. We have 3 of them in the high theoretical and 1 in regulatory. Well, that's good news and bad news. The good news, of course, is that they are less prone on the regulatory scale than economic, and so we might be able to get this group to change by appealing to their economic desires. So bottom line is, given those tests, we can get some indication as to what our groups look like and how prone they are to change. And then given the motivational measurements, then we can discover how we can appeal to them to perhaps get them to move in the direction we need to go. And so here's some strategies for developing an Agile workforce. First place, hire Agile people. And we use this set of assessments as a screen when our clients are hiring people, so we know what kind of people are being hired. We need to train everybody in foundational skills so that we have some flexibility of moving people around in the organization. We need to set clear goals and direction, and if we are moving in a different direction than in the past, that needs to be clear at all levels in the organization. We want to break down silos. The more silos we have that protect their own organizations, the more difficult it is to change. That's another topic of a whole different conversation we could spend a whole session on. But essentially, rotational programs, meetings that bring in people from different organizations, trying to open up communications across boundaries in the organization is really important. Choose flexible executives, and that is the people who are capable of moving in different directions and can understand the people. And we want to choose agile organizational styles. We want to have organizational structures that can be changed and moved, and where we don't develop those silos. And the last one is develop minimal HR rules. Job descriptions can be a major deterrent, because if people are given job descriptions that say here's what you must do, then to change those jobs and directions, we have to basically change the descriptions, and that slows us down. And so these are just some things that hopefully can get you thinking about agile organizations. But to wrap up, we need to have an agile organization. In addition to an agile workforce, we need the ability to be able to sense the future, to have a clear strategic direction. We need executives and leaders who can align with the new goals, and you need flexible resources that you can move the resources, money, people, other resources, to the new goals. So I'm Grant Tate of The Bridge Ltd., and I've enjoyed the chance to speak with you in this recording. Thank you.